You know, there's been a number of articles and discussion papers around fee disclosure and the possible elimination of embedded fees. I thought our viewers might be interested in getting a perspective from an advisor in London, Ontario, Adam Chapman, who's had a very strong focus on moving existing clients into a fee-based environment. And it's also helped them add 12 million of new assets from new clients. So Adam, let's start off with the first question, and that is, why did you move into this fee-based environment?
Well, Art, again, it was kind of one of these things where it was a bit accidental, actually, at first. I was working with a lot of my existing clients using a lot of third-party mutual funds. And the DSC schedules and stuff were actually making my job significantly more difficult to rebalance portfolios, having to constantly dodge DSCs and whatnot. So my initial move was to stop that. And then, of course, with CRM2, I just started navigating the different ways that I could charge to make up that difference. If you're not doing DSCs, there's a bit of a hit to your compensation.
Yep.
So it was about finding a way that would supplement that and actually make the process easier going forward. And that's kind of how I landed on the fee-based environment, is because it is very similar to the embedded system. If anything, I would say it's actually significantly better because it puts the advisor in control of their compensation versus leaving it up to the fund managers to decide how much you actually make based off of doing what's right for your client. It had always irked me that, a bond fund pays half as much as an equity fund, and that type of stuff to me. I would rather know I'm making the same for each client rather than having to worry a more conservative client is going to pay me half as much.
Okay. And, I've heard people, advisors say that, by going into a fee-based environment, it really separates the cost of advice versus the cost of investing. And that's really what you've been able to do. So to your point, if your advice is to put them into a bond type fund, why should you get paid less? I agree.
Well, and even just as you mentioned there, the cost of investing versus the cost of advice has actually been one of my targeting comments when we're dealing with robo-advisors or dealing with a new client that's coming in from a brokerage. It's easier to separate and say, you're just getting investing advice. Here's what you're paying for that, versus now here's the investment piece within your fee-based system, and my advice is on top of it. And what I've actually found is that the base cost of a mutual fund or indexed fund portfolio is actually the same, if not cheaper, than even your robo-advisors or your brokerage. So when you're comparing that cost of investing now across the marketplace, it's actually all on the same level, if not better. It's just the advice that you add on top of, which is your advisor fee or your trailer, is what gives you control over what you're charging and what you're delivering for those services. I think it really allowed me to dig into what I do want to be delivering and how much I need to charge to be able to do that, versus feeling like I was just able to receive what, again, the fund companies were paying me, and I could only deliver what I was able to afford to deliver because that's what they were paying me a certain amount for.
Okay, great. How have your clients responded to this conversation?
A lot of the clients, once they realize that the system actually, a fee-based environment, isn't much different than the embedded system. It functions exactly the same. It's just now things are a little bit more visible. CRM2 already took care of that for us. So the fee-based is actually nothing more than just saying, okay, you can still see the fees, but now the advisor's actually in control of it. And when I can say that to them, the interesting piece is that they actually appreciate that I'm the one in control. So the flip side that I've had to do is, obviously, when I'm building my portfolios, is look to companies that don't have a tiered pricing model. That's been the other key part of this communication to clients, because what it does is I can now say, you know what, I know exactly what your portfolio costs, whether you have 100 grand or 5 million, and I can actually do that math in my head now. So when I can reiterate that to clients that it's very consistent, and the only time the fees will change is if a fund company changes it for everyone in that particular fund, or if we've had discussions and I feel I either need to increase my fees or decrease my fees, and they've been quite comfortable with that. So far, I have only had one client out of the probably 40 or so I've had the discussions with, and I've moved probably about 30 so far. I've only had one client that was a little bit hesitant, only because he's actually one of these guys that just prefers not to know much of anything. He's just quite happy sitting there looking at his statements, and that's the extent of what he wants to know about things. So, you know, he was one I just had to say to him, look, we'll try the fee-based. If you don't like it, you can still move them back. That if they don't like seeing those fees, great, we can move you back into the embedded system, and now that CRM2 still shows them what it is. It's just buried somewhere on a statement versus a little bit more visible.
Okay, good.
You know?
You know, when you first started this, did you have any kind of a confidence crisis? I hear advisors being a little concerned about how their clients are going to react and whatnot. What was your experience?
So far it's been really good. Even going back to them, and I think what it does, and the part that scares, I think, the advisors, and this was the part that scared me too, was making sure I also had enough time and a system to follow up with them afterwards to make sure they were feeling comfortable. And once we sort of nailed that down, just, you know, again, calling them after they got their first statement after a fee-based thing, and touching base a little bit, everyone seemed to be fine with it. And that sort of hesitation I had leading into it was more just, I know it's going to potentially drive a little bit of drop in revenue temporarily. But the thing is, it only took me a year and a half to get back above and beyond where I was originally doing the DSCs. So yes, there's a drop, but again, year and a half, and I'm now, my trailer base is higher than what my full DSC and everything I was doing before was. And now I don't actually need to worry about driving as much new business each year because my trailers provide everything I need to support my business. It's like we've talked about the change. Once I sort of worked through the calculations a little bit, it ended up resulting in an increase in trailer revenue on my existing clients of 51%. While at the same time, it decreased my clients' costs by about 22 to 23%.
Wow.
So they've won, and I've got a significantly higher trailer base, and that was just on my existing clients. That didn't include the additional 12 million that we brought in over that sort of year and a half transition as well. So it does have a slight temporary change to your income by avoiding the DSCs. But you know, even the revenue stuff aside, the simplicity it drives in my business now is worth way more than that 51% to me. I now have excellent model portfolios using multiple fund companies. It's streamlined the processes. It's easier for me to rebalance portfolios, which means I'm spending less time on client service, which means more time for client acquisition. It's now turned into this whole cycle of being more efficient, driving more capacity, all the stuff that we've talked about in our meetings. It's funny how just the little change into fee-based actually gave me more time, not less. Yes, it's like any project, it's going to take a bit of time up front. But now that I'm a year and a half into the actual transition piece, we're now only transitioning 5 clients a year. And that's just because we're waiting out the DSC schedules.
Right.
We've got those logged. The clients know when those dates are coming. And it's now back to sort of regular business as usual, except my trailers are now well, with total business, we're about 122% higher trailers than I was a year and a half ago from new business and fee-based changes. So I don't think that the income challenge that people are afraid of is actually there. It's being able to weather that year and a half.
Yeah.
And I think that's where having just a good plan and understanding how it's going to impact everything, I think it's pretty easy for an advisor to navigate that.
You know, Adam, 12 million of new assets in about, let's call it 15 months is a lot of new assets. Do you think you're more attractive as an advisor in this environment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've always had the focus on the planning and whatnot. So it's really actually helped me articulate what they're getting for my fee-based charge. The breakout of that, as we discussed, the cost of investing versus the cost of advice or planning piece, it really makes it easier for me to compare what they're currently in versus how I do things, because I can show them the breakout and I can show them how much the government gets to take as well, right? And now we've got an actual true apples to apples comparison. We've never actually had that. When you sit there and people combat, okay, you know, your MER is 2.5%, let's say, with a mutual fund, and then you compare that to a brokerage that's charging, let's say, 1.4. The client can't compare that unless you can give them the breakdown within those mutual funds that says this is the cost of investing, which when you move into that fee-based environment, it's actually incredibly easy to do that. My 100% equity portfolio that I use for clients now is just under 1%, which means for any client that's even at a brokerage, that broker's got to be under that 1% to be beating my portfolio on a cost basis, okay? And I have yet to find a lot, especially in the Toronto area. I keep coming across portfolios where the broker's charging, you know, 1.5, 1.6 on a few million of assets. I can do that in one of my standard mutual fund portfolios for 1%. So even if I'm charging 0.5% or maybe a bit more, depending on what I'm delivering for the client, their cost stays the same. But now they're getting all my planning services on top of it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them, once they hear that and they see what I deliver, it actually hasn't been that difficult to move them. And it's a lot easier to combat those robo-advisors too, that when you realize even a Wealthsimple and whatnot with their, you know, 0.2 ETFs plus their 0.5 they charge, they're at 0.7 now, which means my portfolios actually aren't that much different than a robo-advisor. They're streamlined. It's the advice piece that they're paying for on top of, which it's validated for me the planning work that I do, because now what people are doing is they're saying, okay, the investment piece, whether I go to a broker, whether I go to Adam, or whether I go to a robo-advisor, the cost is roughly the same. And what these clients are actually doing is they're choosing to pay more to pay me, right? Which has really validated what I do for clients, and that they're willing to take on that extra cost because they see value there. When that value used to be hidden in the full MER, it was harder for me to explain that to people and break it down. I don't run into a lot of issues anymore with that type of conversation. It's pretty straightforward and pretty simple.
Great, excellent. So Adam, how has the personal coach been a catalyst, or how have they helped you move into this environment?
Yeah, well, so as you know, I was quite a few years into some of my fee-based exploration. And when I first started, I was pulling in resources from all over the place. It was actually even difficult at a couple times to find people that actually knew that fee-based was different than fee-for-service. There's a lot of people that confuse the two and don't realize the difference. So pulling together a lot of the information took me a lot of time. Now, when you guys came out with your fee-based booklet, what it did is it took a lot of the things that took me a couple years to accumulate and kind of put it all in one spot. And as we worked through that, it just reaffirmed a lot of the things that I had already come across. And And then, of course, as we've always discussed, it's more the accountability for me that really helps me push through stuff. And, I always wonder, and I go, okay, I now know that jumping into the fee-based environment when I did, the reasons why were all the right things for me. But I go, had we not been working together, would I have delayed it longer? Would I have been slow and hesitant to step into it? I think our regular contacts going through that fee-based booklet, it just made me feel better about taking the plunge. And when we did it, we went full force into it. We transitioned just in the last 12 months. I think I'm right in around 60% of my book of business was transitioned just in the last year. That was a lot of conversations, a lot of paperwork, a lot of changes. And but I'm a year out, and it's pretty simple going forward. So I can say that pretty confidently that it was a lot of the follow-ups and the resources you guys provided that certainly made me feel a lot better about it.
Adam, thanks very much for sharing your experiences with our audience today. Very appreciated.
You're welcome.